Good afternoon. So as Bob said, this is still very weird being in a room full of hundreds of people. So I'm still using my, cheat code, but this time around on my phone. So if you see me looking down, I'm probably looking at my notes. We're talking about supply chain attack. Interestingly enough, I was going to talk about ransomware, but then, the room is full of ransomware talk, so let's do something else. We all knew about what happened with SolarWinds because I have VSA, and I'm guessing most of you will have a question. What is supply chain? Why am I talking about supply chain? So I like this photo. That's the reason why it's in this slide, and I just wanted everyone else to see it. So, what is supply chain? Supply chain is a system of resources that needs to make either a product or a service. And in this, in this topic, in this day, we're going to be talking about supply chain from cybersecurity. So what is a supply chain attack? A supply chain attack is a type of attack that targets organizations. Cyber criminals target organizations' weakest link. So it's not just targeting cyber organizations or IT organizations, but it's the weakest link within these organizations. And in this case, your weakest link is your third-party vendor or supplier. So how does this happen? The purpose of this attack is to compromise trusted service. Again, SolarWinds, very popular one. And from there, they are able to gain access into more resources, into sensitive data, into credentials. I'm going to be talking through the three common types of supply chain attack. We have the malicious code injection into private code base. We have the open source supply chain attacks. And in open source supply chain attacks, there are three different types of attack vector. Typo squatting, dependency confusion, malicious code injection again, and vendor email compromise. So we're going to be looking at each of these types of attacks. So, malicious code injection. What is this? What happens here? The purpose of this is an attacker scans your network, your company's network, and they're looking for a vulnerability, right? So they find this vulnerability, and what do they want to do? They want to find a way to get in. So they introduce a malicious code into your vendor's source code. This is still the similar thing that happened in SolarWinds, where 29 lines of codes were added to SolarWinds' own code, and this was then, sent to their customers. So during the build process, the legitimate code and the malicious code then automates into the update server, thereby pushing malware to multiple customers. Think of trying to update one application to 100 or 1,000 endpoints. Think of the damage that could cause. So you as a customer, you get this update or patch, as we called it, from your vendor, your trusted supplier, and you then update the server. When you update your server, you're indirectly initiating a communication with the attacker, unknowingly, of course, because this was a trusted supplier. And then, sometimes behind the scenes, it could either be APT or it could be a command and control server from a random hacker sitting down in their backyard. We have open source supply chain attack. I think Joe talked about security by default. We like to call it industry word security by design. I think the concept of security by design being essential to a company's network and infrastructure is a conversation that should be had between DevOps team and senior management. It's not enough to build code to solve a problem. You need to build secure code. You need to build secure products. So you're a software engineer, right? Taking codes from the internet is probably might be your day job, might not be your day job. If the code exists and it's ready for use, why reinvent the wheel, right? Just use it from the internet. But there is a downside to that because most of the codes online are infiltrated malware, different things. The attackers would, infiltrate public libraries, adding different types of malicious or malware codes, and you just go to the internet and you grab that because it's an easy fix, right? So let's look at the different types of attack vectors in open source or software supply chain attack. Dependency confusion. Very, very interesting name. This is a technique that involves tricking software installer scripts to pull in malicious packages from public repository. How is this done? So when the attacker scans your network, because they scan your network for information, all of this is around reconnaissance. So they scan your network and they see that you have a package, a legitimate package called ACME node 1.2, right? So they're like, okay, well, you get, they might or might not know that you get codes from online. So they then publish a much higher version that you might need at some point for your products to the internet. And then when automated software tools within your organization then tries to update their dependencies, they might or might not go through external or internal, public or repositories or libraries. And then when they go external, in this case, they automatically download malicious code without knowing. Once again, it's an easy fix, right? So you have established a connection between your network and the attacker. Typo squatting. We all make typos. I still make typos. Thank God for autocorrect. Here, the attacker pegs on human mistakes. Very, very common mistakes, which is, mixing a word, writing one word before the other when it shouldn't be that case. The attacker scans for a legitimate public package. So this is focused on the public repository, the public libraries that we would get different codes from. When the attacker scans for this, they then rename the package with a typo. Multiple types of, random typos that we might use. And then you as a DevOps engineer, software engineer, you go to the internet and you make similar mistakes. It's possible. Let's not say, oh, I don't make mistakes. We all make mistakes. So you then make this typo and then you download the malicious package from the internet down to your network server. Again, the attacker has tricked you using human mind, using, the mistakes that human beings would make. So what do? We try and review our letters. We try and review whatever we've written. Same way when you're typing a message so fast, you try and read it before you send. It's not an easy fix, but this is something that is very possible to, it's a very easy mistake to make when you're on the internet trying to get codes. Malicious code injection. Explained this before, but it's still similar and very, very common where we would go to the internet, software teams, DevOps teams, looking for easy fix, trying to pull data, from the internet, and or the attacker themselves trying to infiltrate your code and trying to find out, okay, what's happening? How can I infiltrate this network and get information? Vendor email compromise. It's a very popular one. Some people might know it as business email compromise. A lot of us, different years of experience would have probably heard one or two stories about this. It's very easy, but at the same time, there's a lot of financial loss when it comes to attacks like this. Here, the attacker sends a phishing email. It could be, related to COVID, the pandemic, the vaccine, anything even related to work as well. And you as a recipient, you get this email. It could be really good. I've failed phishing tests as well before. So, everyone could be a victim. So you go and click on this link and it's like, oh yeah, update your Microsoft account or update your email account. And then you put in the credentials into this phishing site and thereby allowing the attacker steal your information. You're not aware of this, of course, but behind the scenes, your email address, your passwords have been stolen. And then the attacker then monitors your email. They don't kick you out of your email because they need you to establish the communication. They need you to lead them to where information or sensitive data or money is. So let's say they are able to get into a financial account. And then there's invoice, there's payments, there's procurements. There's just so many conversations going on. And then what does the attacker do? They monitor the inbox when it's time for payment. They then reassign the actual account that you as a client were supposed to pay your vendor. And then you take this fake invoice and you pay in the money, and then maybe 2 weeks later your vendor comes back to you to say, oh yeah, I'm still waiting for that money, for the job that we've done. And it's like, I paid you, weeks ago. And it's like, oh no, you didn't pay me. I can tell you for one that I've worked in a place where this happened, and it was a huge financial loss for the company. So why should you care? I mean, I'm just probably standing here blabbing, right? It affects everyone. Whether you're a client, you're a company, you're a business owner, you're an employee, or you're just an individual. It does affect everyone. There's a whole ecosystem of communications, of people, of connections, and it's a ripple effect. Take, for example, if Slack goes down, companies are not able to communicate. A lot of companies depend on Slack. If Amazon goes down, your company could be, running, or Amazon goes down in a country where your services are being hosted, you have a data center there. You're not able to communicate. So maybe you service different clients. That's a financial loss for yourself. But this is as a result of Amazon's database going down. Not your network, just Amazon. So you should care, because any of us really in this room could be victims. You could have your data stolen from, maybe an insurer that you gave your data to, and someone is impersonating you somewhere in China and maybe stealing your money as well. So what can we do to manage this threat? So many things we can do. I'm just going to be focusing on 3 key things that I think is important to share to you. Third-party risk management, because we're talking about supply chain. So supply chain is not just about you. It's about the people that you work with, your organization's supply chain, who is connected to your network, who offers different services to you, who provides, even if it's the cafeteria, for example, that's a supply chain, because, they have access to your building. Do they provide, PPE materials for you? That's a supply chain, whether or not you don't, service the medical area. So third-party risk management. Example of a third-party risk management framework. Companies need to establish a risk management framework because it's important. You need to develop a framework within your organization to assess the risk for your vendors, for your suppliers. Senior management must understand the high risk that comes with dealing with different third parties and what their organizations are exposed to. Regardless of your organization's risk profile, establishing a third-party risk management process is very important. And there are different ways to go about it. Let's take, for example, analysis. What do you do there? You make an inventory of the third-party providers that you want to work with. Who are they? What do they do? Where are they located? What kind of information are they going to have into your network? Why do you want to work with them? It's very important, because before onboarding a third party, you have to identify this risk. It's not enough whether they're best or highly recommended, or some other company that uses them. It's not enough. So you develop a security rating based on the engagements and the impacts from these vendors into your network. The rating could go from low to high to even critical. The purpose of this rating is to understand whether this third-party vendor meets your organization's risk appetite. Because first, you have to have a risk appetite. You have to understand how much you're willing to lose, or if you're willing to lose at all. And then you bring in contributions from subject matter experts. It's not enough for the procurement team to carry out a financial risk around this third party. It has to be from a cyber aspect as well. It has to be from an operational aspect. So you're bringing in delivery managers, you're bringing in senior managers and different people from different teams to understand how should we approach onboarding, or how should we approach bringing on this client or this third-party vendor into our network. What are the risks? Are there any risk? What kind of questions should we be asking them? And then this goes to engagement and approval. So let's say you've carried out due diligence, right? Everything is okay, ticked all the boxes. How do you then engage this third party? If the vendor security, matches your risk appetite, if you're okay with it, the next step is then to have them complete a security questionnaire. Most of you are probably very familiar with security questionnaires with vendors. Most of you are vendors here as well. So why do they need to complete this risk questionnaire, or what the security questionnaire? It's important because the questions give you insights into the third party's security controls that are not visible to the outside eyes. They might not actually have had that communication with you during the first process. So by giving them this questionnaire to fill in, you're getting more insight into their network. You're getting more insight into their business operations. You're getting more insights into what's important to them when it comes to cybersecurity. How are they going to manage your data? How are they going to, access your data? Are they storing your data? If they're storing your data, where are they storing your data? If they're storing your data in, for example, the US and you're based in Europe, is that okay? Is GDPR permitting that? These are questions that arise from the security questionnaire that you give your vendor during the engagement and approval stage. The NIST SP 800-171 gives you an example of the kind of questions that you should ask your third-party vendor. Very important. So let's say you've, again, ticked all the boxes. You're onboarding your you're onboarding your third-party vendor. What happens then? They've received the approval, right? It's important to configure your third-party vendor with zero trust in mind. I know this sounds again like a buzzword, but we'll come to it. With zero trust in mind, it's important because your third-party vendor should not have more access than they need. It's not enough, again, because maybe they have access to, they're managing your server, maybe one server, and they're like, okay, well, let me just give them access to all my servers because they could manage my server. No, you need to restrict access and configure access, again, with zero trust, giving them just access to what they need, and also making sure that the server or whatever systems that you're giving them access to is restricted. So they shouldn't be able to do more than they are doing. They shouldn't be able to do more that they need to do. And they shouldn't be able to creep around because, as we all know, it only takes one credentials to leak. And then there's an escalation of privileges when it comes to supply chain attacks. So then we go to performance and monitoring. It's more important to even more important now that this client or this vendor has been, onboarded to your network, to monitor them. And monitoring them doesn't just mean checking when they log in and checking when they log out. It's more than that. It's checking the changes that they make when they log in. It's checking the times that they log in. It's checking the actions that are taken during the times when they're logging. Whether it's the right time, whether it's not the right time. I think Joe again mentioned the thing about the domain account and checking the 10 minutes and 20 minutes of the domain account's lockout. Those times are very important. So if anything, when monitoring them, make sure that you're monitoring them for the right reasons, because now they have access to sensitive data. They have access to your logs. They have access to your systems, your business network. It's just, you're as exposed as they are to the internet. So you do that. And this is where continuous security monitoring comes into play under performance and monitoring. And CSM is a threat intelligence approach that automates monitoring of information security controls, vulnerabilities for clients. The last one, exits from the contract. So let's say this client or this third-party vendor has fulfilled its purpose and maybe you want to move on. You need to make sure, you need to verify that the access that they had, they are off-boarded properly. So you've onboarded them and it's time to off-board them. It's very important to make sure that the rights, the access, the data that they have is all returned or deleted during due diligence. So, examples of potential risks that companies faces. Reputational risk. We could mention 1,000 clients or customers in this, or companies in this place that have faced reputational risk in the last 12 to 24 months. Operational risk, cybersecurity risk. The NSA here talks about 66% of the attacks focused on suppliers' code. Again, very important to know what you're testing, to know what you're installing, to know what you're patching, to know what you're updating. Also, 62% of these attacks exploit comes from the trust of the companies and the customers of their suppliers. So again, zero trust in mind. Financial risk. We talked about the vendor email compromise, where you pay money into the wrong person. You pay money into the wrong account. This happens all well too much in the industry. Implementing a zero trust model. I like that diagram. It's very important to look at these things from a realism point of view, because these cyber criminals they're trying to use our minds, our human nature, the trust where you bring in a third party, a trusted third party. So not just any third party, a trusted third party like SolarWinds into your network. Thousands of companies, over 18,000 customers are using, SolarWinds. And then what do? They infiltrate your trusted supplier's access network into your own network just to gain information. It's terrible. By implementing a zero trust model, organizations are able to control access to their data and their infrastructure by enabling least privilege, again, giving them access to only what they need and not what they want to have. And this verification process is one of the aspects that zero trust talks about, where, take for example, you have a contractor that has access to one of your server, and then the contractor, might need access to a different server. It's not enough to say, oh yeah, I know that person, or we already give that person access to this server, so let's just give him access. You have to re-verify. Re-verification doesn't stop within your network, especially when you're dealing with contractors, third-party vendors, third-party suppliers. When you're dealing with people that have access to sensitive data, re-verification is very important. Pen testing, another popular one. Testing. A lot of companies set up dev environments and say, oh yeah, we ran a patch, we ran this patch on the dev environment. It was fine. Nothing went down. So it's time to move to production. But you're not treating your development environment as your production. What are the security controls? Are you checking for abnormalities? Are you checking for, different changes in code lines? For example, SolarWinds again, 29 lines of codes. That's a lot of code in my opinion. But that went unnoticed to a lot of customers, even SolarWinds themselves. So testing your environment for abnormalities, testing your environment for backdoors, testing your environment for any sort of change that isn't the usual is very important. So, what are my final thoughts? Coming to the end of this, feel sad now. The National Institute of Standards and Technology states in their software supply chain attack information sheet that, in quote, software supply chain are particularly bothersome and insidious because they violate the basic and assumed trust between software provider and consumer. They also predict that these attacks, supply chain attacks, are going to grow more and more, and we would have almost no resources, almost no plans to control them. Defenders and those who manage corporate risk must focus on where trust is being granted. Trust again. Because, we trust these people in our network. We give them access. It's like opening your door to a friend. And if the trust is abused, what do we do? If you give access to your third-party vendor and they are compromised, and as a result, you're compromised, what do you do? What does your company do? In your third-party risk management. Do you have plans for when your vendor is compromised? Do you have any business continuity plan for what you do when this happens? We need to shift from a model of trust to a model of trust and verify. Re-verification, again, of access, of rights, of who has, access to your servers, to your network, to your firewall, all of those. And if we can focus on building safeguards around our most trusted assets, again, knowing your inventory, it will provide the redundancy that we need to mitigate, if not even prevent, supply chain attacks. Thank you. It's weird. My timer has been asking me to stop talking. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, please. That's a good one. During my research, I did come across even fifth and sixth parties. I think we have to start with who has, access first to our networks. And, when it comes to the TM, the TRM, the risk management profile, by having your vendor carry out the risk questionnaire, you're aware, you're informed of who has access to their data and thereby having access to your data. So first is awareness, because sometimes, companies onboard third parties for a service, and those third parties then outsource the service to another third party. So that's where the fourth and the fifth party comes into place. So if you understand the business model of your third party, you would then have, the information that you need to know if this service that I'm outsourcing now, is it going to be re-outsourced? And if it is, am I okay with it? Do I want to work for this client? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing in general. It's just understanding and carrying out due internal audit, due diligence around who has access to your data, and the person that has access, the client, the company, the customer that has access to your data, who has access to their data. So it's just all about audits. And I'm not giving you a quick fix here because there's none. We always have to just check these things, you have to check them. You have to make sure that you tick not just the boxes, but make sure that you're ticking the right boxes as to, where's your data being stored and who's going to access your data. So, I've been asked to get off the stage, so I think I'm going to go now. I'm around till the end. So if anyone else has any question, I'm very happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you.